In this video, we're taking a real close look at an old school Anglia gasser. Now, this car was built in the 1960s and it's been tucked away for over 50 years. And we'll take a look at some of the changes that the current owner has made. He's put some new tires on it, he's put a blower on it, and it's all in an effort to put this car back on the track where it belongs. Before I get too carried away, I want to remind you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and feel free to leave a comment below. It's pretty cool to think about all the hot rods and drag cars that were built in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and to think that some of those cars still exist today. And this is a perfect example of that. This is one of the best survivors that I've run across. The first things that I noticed on this car were the amazing paint and hand lettering and the magnesium wheels. But let's talk about that paint first. Now, you can see that this thing was sort of a burgundy or red color originally. Obviously it would have been shiny back in the day, but this thing's been sitting for a long time. The paint has aged, it started to crack, it started to bust open, but you can still see the amazing hand lettering on this thing. You can see the A-gas on the quarter panel, the car number. You can see on the front end it says Instigator 2. You can see that it's got some sponsorship lettering on the side of it here as well. But on the back is where it gets really cool. And it's got this amazing pinstriped face and then Gainesville, Georgia. But if you zoom in down here on the bottom, you can see in very small lettering it says the Mad Striper Baldwin 1964. Now that is as cool as it can get as far as identification and even putting a date on it. That helps us tremendously when it comes to identifying this car and documenting it and be able to tell this car's story a little bit better, but that's for a future episode. You can see that this car's been stored on the inside. It's not been sitting out in the field. It's not been sitting under a tree. This car has been either in a barn or in a basement or a garage or shed, something to protect it from the elements because it's not rusted out. The magnesium wheels are still in pretty good shape. You can see that they have turned gray, which is something that magnesium does. When it's not coated with any type of special coating or paint, it turns to this sort of chalky gray. And again, with the rest of the car, I mean, it's aged pretty nicely when you consider that the paint was put on, obviously in 1964, or maybe even a little earlier as far as the actual exterior paint. And then there's some really cool pieces on this car as far as the body is concerned. It's got a one-piece fiberglass front end, and it has fiberglass doors. I love the tilting mechanism on the front end. It's super simple. It's just made out of round tubing. You can see it's in sort of a Z-shaped bend. It's just got this super simple flat bracket that has a notch cut out in it, and when it gets to a certain point, that notch hooks into a stud on the frame, and it's just perfectly simple, so cool and so 1960s. A lot of times on these Anglias, they would actually cut the grills out, or they might cut big circles, or they might cut diamonds or certain shapes or whatever in that grill area to let a little bit of air flow into the radiator. But on this one, the front end's not cut. It's completely smooth on the front, but you can see that they did have some little headlights mounted to the top of those fenders. Under the front of the car, it's got the stock front axle and what appears to be the stock front spring, but you can see a spacer, a block that has been added to that spring pack to raise the ride height just a little bit. You'll also notice that it has the original front brakes on it, and a lot of guys back then would switch over so they could have a more popular 5-lug bolt pattern. But on this car, they kept the 4-lug, but they actually got some magnesium Halibrand wheels with that little 4-lug bolt pattern. On the back, they got rid of the original rear end, and it looks like they may have upgraded it with a 55 through 57 Chevrolet rear end. But they did keep the original style transverse leaf spring on the back, but you can see they built some custom ladder bars like most of the gassers had in the 1960s. When the current owner bought this car, it still had the original tires on it, which included some pie crust slicks on the back and some little skinnies on the front, and he replaced it with modern tires because he actually plans to get out and drive this car. Which brings us to another point, the roll bar. A lot of these cars back in the day had sketchy roll bars. Some of them didn't have roll bars at all. This one, you can see right here, there's some holes in the floorboard, some round holes, and there's little stobs of pipe sticking up out of there. Well, that's where the original roll bar was. It had a 3-point, just the two right there, and a center point in the back. A 3-point roll bar for a car that was undoubtedly pretty fast. If it was running in A-gas in the 1960s, this car was sketchy and wild and probably out of control, and all it had was just this little roll bar. So he's going to upgrade this, put a little bit better cage in there, something to keep him safe when he's going down the track. You can see that the aluminum firewall, which is a hand-built piece, has been moved back, and that was to allow the engine to be set back a little bit. And you can see just very minimal gauges. These are the old school gauges. The custom steering column, that's not the stock location for the steering because the driver actually sat back much further than you would have in an original Anglia. So you can see that, the aftermarket steering wheel, you can see the pedal assembly down on the bottom. There's a lot of custom pieces that went into building this car. Although a lot of people went fast with Chrysler Hemis, Ford had a few pretty popular combinations, but in terms of an Anglia, the small block Chevy was the answer. It was a small engine, it would fit right in there, and you can see that they didn't have to do a considerable amount of cutting to make it all work. You can see that the current owner has the engine just sort of mocked up in there. It's got a Hurst front engine mount, and it's just sort of scotched in there with some wooden blocks, but it's sitting right about where it needs to be. But the thing that gets your attention right off the bat is that supercharger. Now this is not a period correct supercharger for the 1960s. This is more of an 80s piece, but it's still going to make a lot of horsepower and it's going to get the job done in this little bitty lightweight car. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this exclusive look at this old school Anglia drag car. This thing was actually for sale just a couple of weeks ago. Well, that's not the case anymore. The owner has decided to keep it. He wants to keep chipping away at it and get this thing back on the track. But for now, this gives me a huge research project. Gainesville, Georgia, if you're not familiar, is outside of Atlanta, and there were several racetracks within that vicinity. You had Yellow River Drag Strip, you had Atlanta Speed Shop Dragway, you had Jeffco, you had 13 Forks. There were tracks all over the place, and especially as you cross over into South Carolina, there were tons of places to race back in the 60s. So I'm going to be digging through old pictures, trying to find anything that I can to help document this car's history. But for now, I wanted to show this thing to you. And while I was there, I didn't realize it, but this thing was actually parked in a building along with several other cars, which I'll show you in a future episode. You guys will want to see that because there's a lot of cool stuff right here in this same building on this same property. So stay tuned for that. Continue supporting the channel. I appreciate all the views and subscriptions. Thank you for watching.